Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're starting to admitting people into the Zoom room. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday's Mobilities event. It is a collaboration between IPSR in-house seminar and Junction. And my name is Bhanubhatra, your moderator today. And it is our pleasure to have Dr. Bhanubhatra Jittiangat as our speaker for today's event. And this is his second time at IPSR in-house seminar as well. And we are very privileged to have him because he just landed from the US and he was happy to give us a talk today right after he landed. And Dr. Bhanubhatra, if anyone doesn't know him, he is a development sociologist and lecturer in the Department of International Relations at Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. And currently he is also serving as a director of MA and PhD program in International Development Studies, MATES GRID, and his research and teaching interests encompass forced migration and refugees, urban sociology, qualitative research methodology, international migration, and international development. And his regional focus is Southeast Asia and particularly in Thailand. And today his topic will be on policy entrepreneurship and the drafting of refugee law in a non-signatory country, in the case of Thailand. So this study explores the making of national screening mechanism or NSM to classify as forcibly displaced person in Thailand and a non-signatory state to 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol. And this paper argues that the enacting of the NSM as Thailand's first refugee law resulted from the policy entrepreneurship by officials in the Department of International Organizations. And policy entrepreneurship offers another perspective for exploring changes in the non-signatory states' refugee policies that can also be applied more broadly to the context of signatory countries. So as usual, our presenter will have 30 minutes for his talk, and we will open for a Q&A for another 30 minutes. And without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Bhanubhatra. Please, Dr. Bhanubhatra.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhataraporn, for your kind introductions. And then thank you everyone for attending the talk for today on the topic of the policy entrepreneurship and the drafting of the refugee law in the non-signatory states, which is Thailand in this case. This paper is actually, my talk today will be based on the paper already published in the Journal of Refugee Studies earlier this year. And then I think that the host will be able to send you the link to my paper later on. And then this paper is basically looking into how exactly the Thai state, which is a non-signatory state to the 1951 conventions and 1967 protocol, were able to, enacted the refugee law in the countries. And in this case, the national screening mechanisms. And actually just yesterday also, there was a law against torture that was also enacted in the case of Thailand as well, which is a very good news that all these different things are coming all together. Before I go on and start this talk, I would like to mention just one thing, that I have a jet lag because I just got back from the States and I speak really fast. So hopefully, this will explain why I will be reading this script for this particular talk today. At the brink of the 71st sessions of the United Nations General Assembly in 2016, General Prayut Chan-o-cha, Thai leaders took the stage at the Leaders' Summit on the Global Refugee Crisis to declare Thailand's commitment to international humanitarian principles and greater assistance and protections to refugees. Prayut echoed the global call for the collective actions to resolve the heightened refugee crisis, highlighting the responsibilities of all nations so that the refugee burden does not fall on a few countries, including Thailand as well. General Chan-o-cha made 10 pledges to advance refugee rights and protect them as individuals. He declared that Thailand intended to draft a suppression of torture and forced disappearance law, which is already coming out today, and uphold the principle of non-refoulement. The Thai government would commit to seek an alternative to child detentions, develop a screening mechanisms for those who generally need protections, to upgrade detention facilities, to improve detention conditions, and provide access to healthcare and education for the forcibly displaced. Furthermore, he also promised to raise awareness and further understandings among Thai officials about irregular migrations and legal support to the forcibly displaced who face charges. A plan to provide education, certificate, and skill training to camp refugees was also announced so that they could continue studying and working after repatriations. And his final commitment was to issue birth certificates to children in temporary shelters. All these pledges were following up, but the one that I will be focusing more specifically today is that focus on the development of the screening mechanisms, or we known now as the NSM. Many found the pledges to be surprisingly because in the previous year, General Cha's government forcibly displaced more than 100 of Uyghur refugees to China. There was a prevention of Rohingyas refugee boat from landing on the Thai shore. Moreover, the Thai government continued to refuse to accede to the 1951 conventions and the 1967 protocol. However, some commitments gradually materialized, and the one of the most significant one, as I mentioned, is the one known as the creations of the regulations of the Office of the Prime Ministers on the screening of aliens who enter into the kingdom and are unable to return to their country of origins of 2562 or 2019, which is known as the NSM eventually. The NSM was created to distinguish between economic migrants and the forcibly displaced so that Thailand could provide temporary safe haven to the latter. It was finalized in December 2019 and came into effect in June 2020. The final draft of the NSM consists of 39 clauses across 5 sections. The first 2 sections detail screening committees and procedures. The third section discusses the arrangement for protected persons. The final 2 sections cover review assessments and transitory provisions. Several clauses throughout the text include the phrase, for example, as determined by the committees, referring to the enforcement committee that would oversee the regulations implementations. These clauses include the definitions of persecutions, screening criteria, which just came out this month, and cessation clauses. The creations of the NSM make Thailand one of the earliest non-signatory states in Asia to develop its own mechanism for determining refugee status. It was welcomed nationally and also globally. These creations of NSM raise 3 crucial questions that I would like to focus on today. One is that why did a non-signatory state like Thailand enacted a refugee law? Second, who precisely was behind this move? And last but not least, how did they draft this particular law? In these talks today, I will be using the framework of the policy entrepreneurship framework and trace the creation of the NSM. The paper is argued for the essential role of officials at the Department of International Organizations, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who serve as a strategic policy entrepreneur. In the work of Mintrums et al., they define policy entrepreneur as those who work with others in and around policy-making venue to promote significant policy changes. They are characterized by certain essential attributes, skills, and strategies that distinguish them from other political actors. However, for actual change to happen, policy entrepreneurs' investigation must focus also on their entrepreneurship, as referred to by Capano and Galanti as a specific patterns of actions finalized toward the promotion of the policy innovations. And these patterns of actions, including framing problems and agendas, developing policy options, mobilizing support, and also seeking opportunities and attentions. In my papers, I argue that the DIO's officials are policy entrepreneurs in 2 ways. First, with their department's mandates to facilitate international cooperations and protect and advance Thailand's national interests within the United Nations framework. They have the power of authority to call for interagency meetings to consult on matter of multilateral collaborations and put forward their agenda for changes in refugee practices. Moreover, key officials in the Department of International Organizations considers prestigious bureaucratic agencies owing to its diplomatic competitive profile who are mostly returned from prominent overseas posting requiring examinations such as the missions and so on, are also ambitious to make a difference to Thailand refugee practice by trying to institutionalize these refugee management mechanisms. And for these reasons, they have become the policy entrepreneurs in making these happening. The NSM was also created in a context where then the global refugee norms had increasingly socialized the Thai government and its officials in the period of widespread global attention to refugee issues. The 2016 Leaders Summits on Refugees provide an opportunities for the officials from the Department of International Organization to frame Thailand's need to develop the NSM for reducing ad hoc requests by civil society organizations who often sought urban refugee assistance and protections. The Department of International Organization staff filed support from the ruling generals. The latter hope the pledges would neutralize the image of Thailand and also their own image as a coup maker, and also the violators of the non-refoulement principles on the global platform. And for these reasons, it earned them some negative names and so on and so forth. And by creating these mechanisms, hopefully they can recreate the international recognitions for committing to what was previously a trivial concerns in the Thai policy arenas. However, my arguments also go further to argue as well that even though the Department of International Organizations were win in principles, their win in principle was not fully replicated when the drafting of the content of the NSM came to be. Bureaucrats from other agencies were also competing and leverage their bureaucratic status to actually limit change in the Thai refugee policies. Thus, some of the elements of the new mechanisms were eventually less progressive than what it has to be, so on and so forth. Data for this particular research, it came from documentary analysis and also in-depth interview. Documents from my studies doesn't get treated as a tablet of stones, but it as the artifacts with usage and also purpose. So when I do the analysis on these documents, I try to understand how it come to be what it is. Public records were also analyzed. I did read the cabinet resolutions, the interagency memoranda, and also try to trace the discussions between different bureaucracy and also different policy, the connection between different policy directives before and also after the 2016 pledges by General Prayut Chan-o-cha at the Leaders Summit. Besides, I also had conducted in-depth interview with officials and key informants from agencies, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Interior, the National Security Council, and also the Immigration Bureau. At the same time, I also interviewed several NGOs who work on the refugee assistance and protections. And most of the contacts came from colleagues who worked in the circles before. For this particular work that I would like to mention once again, when we think about policies on entrepreneurship, it is really important that we are talking about this because of when the policies come to be what it is and come to be, in this case, come to become a law, right? For change to happen, it requires a work of the policy entrepreneurs. These policy entrepreneur is the one, according to Mintram and Normans, that they are the one who take an ideas and turn it into the actions by themselves. Many ideas emerge from their engagement, in this case, global refugees mechanisms. And in other words, they have been socialized by global refugee governance through their work mandate. However, policy entrepreneurs also needed what I call the windows of opportunities for their ideas to flourish. Davids in 2015 argues that the coalescence of these variables enable policy entrepreneurs to become successful, especially in the context of changes in the national security or in the context of the foreign policies. In the Thai case, the window of opportunity was the Leaders Summit on Refugees, which allows policy entrepreneur to frame problems, set agenda, and also press for policy adoptions and secure support from the ruling generals. And furthermore, what I try to illustrate in this particular paper as well is that the success of policy changes when it comes to the discussion of policy entrepreneurship, it depends on the strength of the oppositions as well. In the content drafting stages of the NSM, the DIO had limited success owing to the strong oppositions of other agencies. And for this reason, some of the elements of the NSM was limited as a result. So now I will go on into the details of what I'm trying to cover and so on and so forth, which basically the ideas of how the policy entrepreneur started with these, like NSMs and how it carry on to become successful as what we see now, say, in the case of Thailand. In these particular studies, I argue for the role of the officials in the Department of International Organizations who serve as a policy entrepreneur, who make an NSM creation possible. I contend that they came to play this role in two ways. First, through their agencies. The Department of International Organizations oversee Thailand's engagement in refugee matters within the United Nations framework. The department also has a social division, which is tasked with the coordinations on the matters related to humanitarian assistance, human rights, and other transnational socio-cultural issues between Thailand and the international community. The engagement of DIO with international norms and global governance structures make it, in quote, the most liberal bureaucratic agencies in Thailand. This is according to one of the interviews that I conducted, while simultaneously granting its particular power of authority to coordinate and engage in multilateral diplomacies through the UN framework. In 2015, the displacement of Syrian, Rohingya, and Venezuelan refugees influenced the global momentums and discourses surrounding refugees, shifting the conversations towards humanitarianisms and burden sharings, which require global cooperations. Officials in the Department of International Organization who were part of the several high-level meetings on refugees found an opportunity to feature Thailand's potential contributions and draw attention to what could be done for resolving the situations at home, especially with regards to the urban refugees at the time. Drawing from their own agencies' mandates and also power of authorities, the officials in the Department of International Organizations were able to call for interagency meetings to consult on Thailand's positions on the global refugee crisis and put forward their agenda for change in refugee practice. And during these periods, there were some critical figures in the Department of International Organization leadership who served as a key persons and has a keen interest in engaging in the global conversation on refugees and sought to make a difference. And that person at that time was Director General Kanchana of the department. She recognized that the lack of the mechanisms to screen and protect the forcibly displaced caused civil society groups to seek help from government officials regularly. The mismanagement of forcibly displaced people could also negatively affect Thailand's securities, international reputations, and also humanitarianisms. The ambitions of the Director General at that time for the better management system also pushed her to learn more about the refugee management in other countries, which also evidenced in her thesis that she wrote for the national defense programs entitled Approaches for Screening of Irregular Migrants. Her study highlighted the significance of refugee problems and suggested that Thailand should establish its own mechanism for distinguishing between those requiring genuine protections and those relocating for economic purposes. The studies also explore the screening models of Hong Kong, Australia, and also of UNHCR itself. The interest and ambitions of a key policy entrepreneur like Director General in the Department in the DIO in this case can help also explain why the persons would be keen to rally support from the department staff for this particular initiative. And the officials from the DIO that I interviewed also use the word team when they describe their work in making this happening. The second element, which is really important for making the NSMs to happen in Thailand, is something I refer to as a window of opportunities. Window of opportunities were essential for materializing the ambitions of policy entrepreneurs. DIO officials capitalized on the global refugee events that were organized for advocating policy entrepreneurship. They framed the problems and garnered support to ensure policy adoptions before consistently turning the policies into a concrete output, meaning the creations of the NSM. In the very first stage, the DIO utilized the UN's Leaders Summit on Refugees in September 2016 as an opportunity for showcasing the Prime Minister's commitment to new policies and practices, including the drafting of the NSM. And to make this happen, the Department of International Organization had called for the interagency meetings on the 25th of August 2016 to seek consultations. Attendees, including several Thai security agencies, coming from National Security Councils, the MOI, the Royal Thai Armed Forces, and so on and so forth. In a written report to the Cabinet on September 9th, 2016, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that all agencies agree on the pledge and had provided comments on the final draft. The official documents reflect a consensus among all agencies, and also DIO agenda's advance seems to be relatively smooth. However, during my in-depth interview with some of the agencies, I learned that several were unsatisfied with the content of the pledge. And officials from one of the agencies said that we, in quote, we flagged our concerns, but we didn't oppose it, since it seems like commitment was coming from higher up or by the Prime Minister himself, in quote. Still, no agency wanted to raise oppositions to the NSM, explaining that the DIO had found allies in a high place, meaning the ruling generals at the time. Another officials also had a negative view toward the pledge and contents, and also suggested that they were not consulted enough on these particular matters, and even used the term sloppiness to refer to this process at the time. Despite the objections of some officials at that moment, the ruling generals were on board with the DIO officials, and these raised the questions: why would the junta at that time want to make this kind of pledge to support refugees? Legal advice from the Council of State provides some hints. The Office of the Council of State suggests that the pledge signals Thailand's commitment to provide more support and assistance for global efforts in meeting global migration challenges. It was neither binding nor did it oblige Thailand to enter into international treaties or agreements. Accordingly, I contend that the ruling general easily agreed to make pledges because it put less pressures on Thailand's sovereignties, and it reflects Thailand's preference for maintaining a large margin of discretion when it comes to the making of the Thai refugee policies. In fact, the leading generals at that time recognized that making a pledge at a meeting hosted by United Nations and also the US offer an opportunity to the regime for seeking international legitimacies and global media attentions. The rhetorical commitment would be a good opportunity to make international headlines by reshaping the international perceptions of the regimes as marked by forced repatriations of the Uyghur and also the coup itself. This sort of commitment is preferred by many states, especially when it comes to refugee issue, but it does not guarantee eventual realizations or concrete actions. Thus, in the case of Thailand, in this case, it's not particularly, unique to the Thai case. It also happened in other cases as well. And the issues of forcibly displaced persons was not a priority in the Thai policy circle as well, with the Thai government officials indicating that it provides enough refugee assistance. That it was a low-hanging fruit with potentials to offer major benefits to the Thai government at the time. And with the support from the ruling generals, the cabinets adopted the DIO policy agendas and paving the way for the pledge to be declared at the Leaders Summit on Refugees in 2016. Now, in order for this to become a law, after the commitment was made by General Prayut in New York City at that time, DIO also pushed for turning these particular mechanisms into a law. The Prime Minister declarations of the pledge in September 2016 was not merely an empty promise for officials at the Department of International Organizations, but it was a ground for actions. On November 30th, 2016, the DIO followed up on the pledge implementations and also once again calling for an interagency meeting, which led to the establishment of a task force for driving the implementation of all commitments, with the DIO serving as a coordinator of this particular attempt. Just give me a second. On December 6, 2016, the Council of the States circulated the very first draft of the regulations, entitled the Regulations of the Prime Minister Office to Manage Illegal Aliens and Refugees for Considerations. This was the first time the word refugees actually had re-emerged in official Thai documents after several decades, but the draft was just a preliminary version. On January 6, 2017, the Cabinet approved the development of NSM in principles, and the Cabinet also appointed the Royal Thai Police through the Immigration Bureau to serve as the coordinating agencies for the creation of NSM, given that the Bureau was already executing the Immigration Act at the moment. Following the Cabinet resolutions, the Department organization consistently followed up on the creation of NSM. Its drafting process started with the appointment of the drafting committee. All committee members were government officials with an overwhelming representation from those in the security apparatus, such as those from National Security Council, those from MOI, and so on and so forth. These suggested that even though Thailand's aim to devise a more progressive refugee policies and practices, national security would continue to be an essential factor. Two agencies with more than one seat in the committees, including the Royal Thai Police and also the MFA. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs had representatives from the Department of Treaties and Legal Affairs, and also from the Department of International Organizations, who serve as committee members. In the committee of drafting process, in the drafting committee, civil society groups and international organizations were not represented in the NSM drafting process. However, the civil society organizations submitted their own draft version of the NSM to a drafting committee and UNSCR also provided additional comments to the draft. The NSM drafting committee met a total of 6 times between 2017 and 2018 before eventually submitting the final draft of the law to the Council of the States for legal advice and for approval in October 2018. It took almost a year for the draft to be reviewed. Feedback was submitted back and forth to the drafting committees, and eventually the final version of the NSM was actually published in the Thai government gazette on December 25, 2019. The DIO officials also faced resistance from representatives of other agencies and departments throughout the NSM drafting process. The fragmentation of bureaucracies was a critical factor that also limited the DIO officials' abilities to replicate their initial success. It allows some agencies to be more vocal in making opposition against the restrictions, in making the restrictions towards the progressiveness of the NSM itself. And the 2 contention areas, including the use of the term refugees and also the structure of the NSM itself. The word refugees is actually very contentious in the Thai policy circles for quite some time. A National Security Council official suggested that the use of the word would signal Thailand's willingness to ratify 1951 conventions and also the 1967 protocol. Thailand has always been concerned about accommodating refugees, fearing it become a pull factor, attracting more refugees into the countries. However, some officials, including those from the Department of International Organizations and immigration bureaus, suggested that regardless of what the forcibly displaced would call, the government has obligations to uphold international refugee principles, such as the principle of non-refoulement, and that pull factor is what, no matter what, unavoidable. And thus they wonder why Thailand should continue to play with words. The latter view was not well received by the majority of officials in a drafting committee. And by August 2018, neither the terms refugees nor asylum seekers appear in the draft regulations. The term refugees was also replaced by the word protected persons, while the term asylums was replaced with the word persons under screening. The use of these alternative terms was meant to provide Thailand with a tool for responding to refugee situations without referring to the international legal refugee terms. In terms of the structures, the NSM was also scaled down from being a screening mechanism only, despite previously being conceived as protection mechanisms also. The Office of the Council of the State suggested the omitting of the terms to protect from the title of the refugees from the title of the draft in the final draft, arguing that it did not align with the main content of the NSM, and its omission would prevent the NSM from becoming a pull factor, attracting more refugees to come to Thailand. Thus, the NSM was not meant to serve as a protection tool or a right-granting mechanisms, although some rights were conferred to refugees who would be screened as a protected person later on, and those are 2, which are the one on education and the one on right to healthcare. However, the NSM continued to mention the principle of non-refoulement and also the rights, as I mentioned, of education, particularly for children or protected persons. And this right to education is actually guaranteed in the Constitution itself. One thing that I want to take note is that in the early draft of the NSM, it also refers specifically to the right to work, which it was something that got strong objections from many officials. The reason why these terms were taken out, it's keep going back to the ideas of how this particular word will become a pull factors that going to be attracting more people to come to Thailand. But nevertheless, even though this term was taken out, that doesn't mean that like the right to work will not be conferred eventually. Because of that, in one of the interviews that I conducted with one of the officials, they suggested that perhaps there could be some other mechanisms that could be used to allow the right to work to make it happen, and so on. Another thing that I would like to take note in this particular creation of NSM is that NSM was adopted as the lowest form of law in Thailand's hierarchy of law, which is as a regulation of the Prime Minister's office, which eventually allow it to be easily terminated by a cabinet resolution as well. So throughout the process of turning this refugee law, these pledges into law, DIO officials were really much unsuccessful in pressing for more progressive contents of the NSMs. but they continue their advocacies by ensuring that the regulations will provide a permanent seat, will be able to have a role in provide comments and suggestions to make changes and difference to the NSMs by providing the seats of in the subcommittees, and so on and so forth. And the first round of contentions where the DIO and other officials were able to discuss and manage the situations of the NSM was in the subcommittee levels where they're drafting the eligibility criteria for the protected persons, which is it go back to what I quote early on as determined by the committees. We will see that the definitions of refugees and definitions of the persecutions that come out from the committees eventually it's broader than it also suggested in international conventions itself. And also this allows the advocacies from the DIO part and as well as the civil societies to actually play a role as well in here. Nevertheless, I mean, because of the status of the NSM as the regulations of the Prime Minister office, eventually it could be cancelled at one point or in some time in the future. You never know, right? Because it's the lowest law, because it's the lowest form of law in Thailand's law, in the Thailand's hierarchies of law. And for these reasons, you know, it's still uncertain whether or not these mechanisms will be able to maintain in the long time in the middle of the refugee crisis that we are facing also in the world at the moment as well. So let me move on quickly to the conclusions. So these studies recognize that the public policy frameworks is particularly beneficial to refugee research. And by applying the concepts of policy entrepreneurship, it also reviews how policy changes is possible, even within the context of refugee policies in non-signatory states like Thailand. The concepts provide the foundations for 3 layers of analysis to look at the agents of change, windows of opportunities, and also how the former exploited the latters to effect changes. These studies also details the abilities of policy entrepreneurs to exploit window of opportunities to structure problems and advocate changes, resulting in a new policies, which is in this case is also the creations of NSM as a law. However, it's also acknowledged that policy entrepreneurship might encounter oppositions in the process of making changes. Thus, the extent to which policy change is implemented also depends significantly on policy entrepreneurs' commitment and also the strength of the oppositions they encounters. I will end my talk here, and I have to apologize, you know, if some part of the talk is not clear, given that, you know, as I mentioned, the jet lags I'm still having because I landed from the US just this morning, like 3 hours ago. So if you have any questions or, you know, like concerns about the talk or any suggestions, please feel free to raise your questions, and I will be happy to respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your fantastic talk despite your conditions right now. And it is very interesting to learn about, you know, policy entrepreneurship in terms of, you know, drafting the law and using the window of opportunity to, you know, push for that policy or laws to come about. And also it was very interesting about the term policy entrepreneurship, because when we talk about policy, we know about policy makers. So I just want to know what are the differences between, you know, policy entrepreneurship and policy makers. Are they, you know, playing a different role? They have different functions, or what? Yeah.
Right. I think that's a great question, and I got asked all the time. And I have to be honest that I try to translate these terms into the Thai language, but I do not know how to do it. Because of, you know, like there's no term, no ways I would be able to use it. I think that the ideas of the policy entrepreneurship actually come from the public policy framework, as I mentioned. And when they are doing it thinking more about when it comes to the making of the policy, it's not simply just about making of the law, but it's a whole process of, you know, like entrepreneurial thing, right? Starting from, you know, like getting the idea or gathering the ideas. And second of all, it's to make this idea and turn these particular ideas into changes, and then also driven these changes to make it happen on the ground eventually. So with the term entrepreneurship is kind of like I'm thinking of this more as a, you know, how would I put it? The SME, right? When you start a business and then you start from scratch and then try to get it done eventually. So it's kind of more comprehensive in that sense. When in contrast to the policy making or policy decision makings, right? Or policy makers, that it focus on the making of the policy itself. But that doesn't mean that these policy makers are the one who driven for those changes eventually, right? I mean, in the whole process. But in this case, I try to show in the case of the DIO roles as a policy entrepreneur, they were part of the whole process and continue to be in the long run. So because of this, I think that's how I would distinguish the two terms, and at the same time why the term entrepreneurship, a policy entrepreneurship, is also variables in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have some questions in the chat. Kun Kasina, would you like to ask the question to the speakers yourself? We have a question from Kun Kasina asking, are there draft laws from political parties too, and what are their standing points on refugees?
There's no drafting law on the refugees part. I don't think that there was a draft law from the political party yet. I haven't seen that, at least. But then, of course, I mean, the debate about refugees has been mentioned several times in the Thai parliaments, particularly as we can see from the Khao Krai party, for example, that have been discussing about it. But then to say that those like debates turns into law in itself, we haven't seen that. And then so when it comes to the law, as I mentioned, in the case of NSM here, it's also driven mainly, my argument is that it's driven mainly by the bureaucracy, the bureaucrats themselves within the Thai bureaucracies, right? I mean, rather than, like, of course, there are those civil society organizations that are working on it as well, but then, the key part that making it all happen is still within the bureaucracies rather than within the political parties and so on. But who knows, after the elections next year, maybe political parties going to play more vital roles in all this. Yeah, and then I think that's something to be seen.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we have a hand raised from Rebecca Barr, please.
Hi, Dr. Bhanubhatra. Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I'm actually tuned in from the UK at the moment, so it's about 8:30 in the morning here. So yeah, I did live in Thailand for quite a long time, and I did some research with refugees. And I'm just wondering, how effective do you think the national screening mechanism would be in terms of engaging, refugees that are already living in Thailand, living in very kind of marginalized conditions, living illegally? How effective do you think it will be in engaging, those communities and providing protection for them?
Please unmute. Yeah.
I think we have to separate two parts. So the first part is in terms of protection. I will comment on that later on. I will start first from talking about how effective it will be in terms of engaging with these communities. I think that, first of all, it's an important step. I'm not going to say that it's going to be a perfect step, because it's going to be a lot of lessons to be learned from these mechanisms, given that this mechanism has never been used yet. And then the criteria for the eligibility just came out this month alone. And because of that, like I would assume that the whole process is going to start basically next year. And if the process is going to start next year, it means that to think about the effectiveness of it, like it will begin from next year. But then from my perspective, I believe that at least, like it allows people who say in Thailand illegally now will be able to remain to remain in the country legally. And I think this channel is something that, of course, is positives. But at the same time, I'm also aware that refugee mechanisms in every countries, it's not a mechanism to screen people in. It's a mechanism to screen people out. Right. So the question is how to basically deal with those people who got screened out of the system, because of, like sometimes in most mechanisms, it's based on evidence, and this evidence refers to as documents. But many of refugees, they came when they fled, they did not have those documents to prove that how our house got burned down and so on and so forth. Right. Not all of them would have that. So I think that the most important part, it's within the eligibility criteria. There was one clause that focused specifically on the development of the handbook. And this handbook it's a handbook that kind of delve into details on the steps in which like how to determine the status of the persons. So in that case, at least like hopefully with that handbook that got developed, it will allows various groups of people to be protected. Okay. Second of all, because of even though with the eligibility criteria at the moment that came out, with the time of the development of the NSM, it was not delved yet. Thailand did not foresee what happened in Myanmar at the moment at that time, right? So this is something that evolved after the NSM got created. So the question is whether or not the NSM will be able to also use to manage the Burmese refugees that are going to come in recent months, in the previous years, and go on from now, right? It remains unclear. So this question is still a big question mark. Of course, I mean, my belief is that they should go through the same system. That's why the system got created. But again, like even because of this system was created based on the individual basis, not a group basis, right? Then the question is also raised whether or not there could be a separate system that will be used to manage the case of those people who came as a prima facie, like those from Myanmar, for example. Now, that's just about the screening. Again, about the protections. I'm not sure though. I mean, even with these screening mechanisms, that protections will be guaranteed, because with the protections, like as I mentioned, like it doesn't mention the right to work, for example, which is one of the most important rights for them to maintain and live with dignities within the countries, right? And even though there was a right to healthcare and right to education and so on and so forth, my belief is that with the creation of NSM, one thing that Thailand left undone is to create a burden for itself. What do I mean by that? It means that, like Thailand say all the time that, like refugee is a burden. But that burden, like now, since you leave out that right to work, you are creating the burden for yourself because of it. You, once again, ask refugees to depend on support and so on and so forth from different and various organizations, rather than be able to use their own agencies, to support themselves also, right? In that sense. So for me, in this case, this is kind of like a big loophole in terms of protections that the Thai government cannot resolve. But then potentially, because of these NSM will be reviewed every year technically. So it should be after 1 year that, like some of the process can be developed and so on and so forth. Or else there could be some other tools, some other mechanisms, or some other laws that can be used to supplement these particular NSM mechanisms so that, refugees can get protected eventually. Sorry that it's a long answer that I gave.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, we have another question from Ajahn Sudarat from IPSR. Ajahn Sudarat, would you like to turn on the mic?
I'm trying to turn on the mic. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
The oversight, more about the oversight over this screening mechanism, and is the monitoring effectiveness for the screening mechanism already in process? Is UNHCR part of it? Those kind of things.
All right. Thank you, Khabachan. I mean, the question about monitoring is something that's really important. It's not yet there. So basically, there's no oversight monitoring of the effectiveness of the NSM in place yet, because of, first of all, the NSM hasn't been used or hasn't been implemented fully yet, as I mentioned, But in the process of developing these mechanisms and also training of the people who are going to be part of the NSM, of course, now within the Thai Immigration Bureau, that was the creation of Division 4. That devoted their entire work to the NSM, basically. So at least this institution is there. And second of all, like these institutions, these new divisions is also working very closely with UNHCR. So in some way, even though there is no formal oversight mechanisms at the moment, UNHCR provides consultations and also assistance in the process of like doing this particular process to the Thai government. And I would assume that that's how the oversight, like the unofficial one is actually taking place. But then at the same time, what I think that it would be important, and this is a question for the civil society organizations, is that in the process, when the NSM is implemented and used, perhaps next year, as I mentioned, what happened is that the gathering of the informations by the civil society organization to have a shadow report and then reflected in as part of the review, because of this mechanism is written in the regulations that it must be reviewed once a year. So in that process, the CSO can use a report and information and data that they collected to be able to give an oversight or to monitor this particular mechanism, so that to ensure that is effective. And I would assume that I wouldn't say that it will be perfect from the first time they're doing it, but at least this is a really important step that is happening. Yeah. So I mean, to answer your to repeat my answers once again, I mean, at the moment there is no official oversight mechanisms, but then of course there are channels always in which the oversight and monitoring can actually be pursued.
Okay, do we have another questions from the audience? Okay, Rebecca again, please.
Sorry, I don't mean to hog here, but just in case if no one else has a question, then. So you kind of mentioned at the beginning that the government had sort of committed to obviously the NSM policy, but also to improving kind of conditions for refugees in Thailand in terms of, well, conditions in the detention centers, and particularly preventing children from being detained. I remember I was in Thailand when that particular kind of policy was introduced. How much has it progressed since then, would you say?
All right. It's live stream, right? Okay.
Yeah, I understand if you can't be completely.
Two parts to this. The first part is that yes, there was the creations of the detention centers. So there's a new facilities now that got created and provided and for the people to stay. Right. I mean, that's the first thing to say, that there was a newer facilities, and it's in the outskirts of Bangkok. So it hopefully that if it open use, then it's going to be less crowded in terms of detentions. Second of all, in terms of the children in the detentions, they're still there. Okay, I think that's in news, right? And then it's always in news that like, even though there was an MOU on detentions, but then there were cases of children that's still there in the detention center. But the thing was that I have to mention this as well, that it's not the rest of the students itself alone, but also because of if you think about it in this sense that in some cases their parents got arrested, right, and they come stay detentions. Of course, I mean, the immigration cannot just leave the kids outside, right? So that's the reason why there were the existence of children within the detention centers as well. But I'm not sure about the management, how exactly that whether they got to relocate or transfer yet to the areas where the whole family should stay together and so on. How many families and I would assume that in one of the report I wrote, there were approximately around 200 children in the immigration detentions. I mean, of course, I mean these figures can be debated because of there's no one knows the actual number, basically because of the records are badly kept in the sense, but based on the observations and at least information that I got from society organizations, they are also they're still. So I mean, in terms of progress, I think that like if you look back into the refugee management within Thailand, starting from 2016 onwards, you can say that like prior to the pandemic, it was kind of the hype of the refugee protections within the countries, with all these mechanisms and all these different things coming out. But then after pandemics and so on, it also going back, it's downgraded and so on and so forth in a significant way as well. So but then again, like that's why I mean I still believe that if there would be another policy entrepreneurship who keep pushing for this again, maybe it would be a change that can happen. But then again, it's go back to how uncertain the system is, right? Because of then it means that these things, even though it try to get institutionalized by the policy entrepreneur, eventually, you know, like if that policy entrepreneur doesn't carry it on, or, you know, like there was some, you know, like changes in those in positions of powers in making difference to these policies, and, you know, like then things can go back to the same like what it was before. So I mean, that's how I would assess it at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how, you know, a child is kind of defined also, because I know that even kind of post 2016, when they were sort of introducing this, there were several minors, you know, in detention, some as young as sort of 13, 14, who actually were in on their own. They weren't actually in with their families.
Exactly.
So yeah, it would just, you know, be interesting to know how, yeah, if that is, if there is more of a kind of commitment to
and I think that, you know, like one of the most important thing is that in the NSM also suggested that, you know, in the eligibility criteria also suggested that, you know, for those of the children, it need to be used, the MOU ATD, to actually, you know, like bring the children out of the detentions. And this would be some, it specifies specifically that you have to follow the process written down in the MOU ATD. Basically, that's something that laid out clearly in the NSM also, and the eligibility criteria is also in the process itself. So in that case, hopefully once it's implemented, these MOU will be followed. But of course, I mean, there is no guarantee, right? I mean, in terms of practice, but then that's why the role of monitoring and oversights would be something that's quite important moving forward from now on. Yeah, and then another questions that also got raised often these days is where, you know, like if once these people, you know, like they go into the detentions and they're coming out to go through the process of screening, where are they gonna stay, right? Where exactly are they gonna stay? Are they gonna be able to live freely in the cities, or what would it mean to talk about the designated place where the officials allow them to stay? Like, where would that be, and so on? So, you know, I mean, those are some of the questions that left unanswered at the moment, you know, which is also tie into the whole process of, you know, like bailing out and so on and so forth. That I think it will require more inputs from the side of the officials at the time being.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question?
Maybe I can ask.
Yes, Adalia.
So thank you very much, Ajahn Khan, for the presentation. I wonder, the current situation with Burmese coming to Thailand, is it going to influence any of these policies from your perspective? Because we are talking about large number of people. Yes. Very different situation from urban refugees or other more limited populations.
Yes.
This is the first question. The second question regarding these entrepreneurs, how are they impacted? Meaning they may operate within a certain context, but there are groups trying to influence them probably. How you see that the larger picture of who is influencing these entrepreneurs? Civil society, refugee themselves? I mean, who would be the stakeholder that are able to influence these entrepreneurs? I suppose they don't act on their own, right?
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Leah, for the questions. I think both of them are really important. Let me go from the first question on the Burmese refugees that are coming in. Of course, I mean, it has an impact on the particular thinking about NSM in particular, because of, you know, like it in the process of drafting the eligibility criteria, which I happen to sit in as a subcommittee member. It also got raised that how this situation is going to fit in with the NSM creations in itself. So the first thing is that, you know, like as I mentioned, so NSM when it was conceptualized, it was not foreseen the situations in Myanmar coming in. So to that extent, you know, like it wanted to focus more specifically on urban refugees, right? But now since the situation changed, you know, also to some degree, I think that, you know, like no one knows what's going to happen yet, right? If the Burmese refugees, for example, apply, for this NSM through this NSM process, what's going to be the result and so on and so forth. But of course, I mean, the trial would be important to see how it worked out and so on. Nevertheless, though, I mean, because of the huge number of people coming from Myanmar or migrating from Myanmar is significant. There are a separate mechanisms that got to be conducted. But then the question about that policies will be something that alternative to also NSM as well. And the debate would be around that, how they're going to be able to situate or come to Thailand and maybe stay in the urban areas, not in the camp, but at the same time, they may not, like over flooded into the NSM mechanisms. So perhaps another mechanisms could be something that's got to be thinking. And I believe that there was some kind of thinking along this very same line within the Thai policy circles at the moment. Nevertheless, we haven't seen it taking shape yet at the moment. For the time being. So this remained a big question mark for us to actually been thinking. Second question, I think it's a great questions, and I would say that, like when I was discussing about policy entrepreneur, it was not the CSO and it was not refugees themselves that influence the decisions of the policy entrepreneur in themselves. It was more about the thinking in the way that, how are we going to be able to lessen the burden of the bureaucracy in itself by making something institutionalized, and what are the impact? That's so the agencies of the policy entrepreneur themselves. That's the first thing that's really important, and how to find creative ideas in doing all this. But second of all, though, I think that it's a refugees norm, because of it will link to the process that I didn't discuss in this particular paper on the norm entrepreneur and norm entrepreneurship, that how once these officials are embedded into the mechanisms or in the global system, and learning from other global system and see, like what could be possible and how they draw from it. Those are also something that kind of influence their thinking. So the first stage, it's coming from how to resolve the ad hoc situations, making it institutionalized, which come from the agency themselves. But at the same time, the influence come from the refugee norms and also refugee practices in the global levels. Because if you look into the work or the thinking of the key person, the key agents in the Department of International Organizations, you will see that they look into the refugees screening mechanisms of several countries, right? For example, they look into the mechanisms in Hong Kong, which is one of the earliest countries that in Asia that having these type of mechanisms, like for implementing the unified system. And at the same time, they look into some other mechanism in Australia, and also even one in Pakistan as well, right? So it's kind of like these global refugee practice that's kind of also impacting or influencing the way that the policy entrepreneur were cultivating their ideas. So in that sense, like I think that it more like externals influence more rather than internal influence within countries that kind of get shaped the way that the policy entrepreneurs kind of thinking about this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leah.
I think we have time for one more question. If anyone has comments or questions, you can make it now. Okay, I think we have something in the chat box. Okay, Solwin from APRN. So asking, during the implementation of NSM, how CSO's workforce can work together with officials to make NSM process more effective for protection of refugees.
I'm muted. Thank you, Solvin, for the questions. And then nice that you are here also to join me as well. I think that it's really important to set up a mechanisms that go in parallel with the NSM. So because of, as you may know now, NSM also appointed two other subcommittees. One is the subcommittee that's going to be the one that reviewing the applications, and then another subcommittee is to be the one that focus more specifically on the appeal and so on. I think that it's really important that there will be a committee among the CSO groups themselves that kind of work in parallel with the government agencies here. I mean, work in parallel in this case mean kind of, like doing the very similar process and see the situations. For example, in the case of those who got screened out, what happened to those cases? What happening within the process of the screening? What goes wrong? And what could be some good practice and can be learned from what happened there, and feedback this into the system. Once it comes to a yearly review, that must happen, because that's already what's written in the regulation itself, right? So I think the most important thing is it's to have this parallel process that's kind of working along. Second of all, because within the NSM is also created and built in some of the ways in which the civil society organizations are actually working, and also with some other international organizations, including IOM or UNSCR as well. So in that case, engagement in another levels with other INGOs would be something that would be significant as well, for the CSO to work together, effectively on this particular part. Third of all, it's on the protection part, as you mentioned in the question itself. As I mentioned, is that the NSM right now, it's focused more on the screening, but not on the protections. So how exactly for refugees to be able to get protected or to be fully protected would be something that's quite significant and important. So in that case, to find the ways to actually assist refugees from that particular angle would be something that the work of the CSO task force or the workforce would be important. And last but not least, working as a network that you have been doing, it's already a great work. Like for example, now you've got the April network, right, which is working, and learning throughout the entire regions. But at the same time, within Thailand, there's a very significant group, like for example, the CRSP. So working together as a group here and do a regular checkup with the government officials, and doing all these pillar of things that you've been doing. I think that's been a great work that the civil society organization has been doing already. So in that particular angles, I would strongly encourage continuations of that particular practice. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we're out of time now. And thank you very much, Ajahn Bhanubhatra or Ajahn Kan, again, for his amazing talk and also his, answers to all the questions that very resourceful. And also thanks the audience for your comments, your attention, and your attendance. And we will meet again for Wednesday Sea Mobility events with IPSR and Sea Junction in December. So it will be the last event of this year, and stay tuned for the next topic. Okay, see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. ขอบคุณค่ะ